Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. My name is David McGlennon and I am your host. I am really excited to be here with you once again on this episode. I think it's episode 173. Gosh, it's really hard to believe that we're creeping ever so quickly to 200 episodes. But I'm really excited about today's episode and today's guest because when I started not only this podcast, but I also started my company, I really had at the core people, because if we can have our people grow, if we can help our people grow, if we can help our people reach their potential, then I know that our companies will grow as well. There's not only just anecdotal evidence, there's also research that backs this up. And today's guest is someone who has a depth of knowledge and experience in the realm of people leadership. And so I'm really excited to introduce to you today Felicia Shakiba. And Felicia is the founder, podcast host, and Fractional Chief People Officer at CPO PLAYBOOK Consultancy. And she serves as an advisory board member for Y Combinator company Extern. She's also the former global head of performance management of the $12 billion multinational advertising and PR technology giant WPP. And she's the former head of talent management for Harman International, which is a Samsung company. She's led several international HR teams as the chief people officer for clients in industries such as fintech, biotech, ad tech, and so much more. She's also had nearly 20 years of experience in people strategy, and she's impacted over 200,000 employees in her career. And so I know that this conversation is going to be beneficial no matter if you are a senior leader or if you're an emerging leader or somewhere in between, because we talk about a number of different topics that I know are going to be beneficial to you. So let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Felicia right now. Well, hey, Felicia, welcome to In the Growth Space. I am so excited that you're here and really excited for this conversation.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, David. I'm really happy to be on this show today. And I love the work that you've been doing. I love all your episodes and I listen to them. So
Thank
really
you.
happy to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thinking about growth strategies and you being, an expert in people strategy, how do you start? Where do you start with people strategy when it comes to wanting to grow as an organization?
Wonderful question. So I work with plenty of executives, founders, business owners, and I think that most people think about growth from a people strategy perspective as talent acquisition, which
Mm,
it partly is,
sure.
but I wouldn't start there. Where I would start is actually um, at the top, which is executive leadership. And the reason why I say that is because to actually craft a proper talent acquisition strategy, you really have to understand the business mission and vision, which determines the business values. And
Mm,
then until the leadership team is actually living and breathing those values, you really are stuck
mm,
in a way that you're going to kind of draw circles around, processes, because people in the business can see right through leadership when they don't live and
yeah,
breathe the values. And
so
so they
true.
question whether or not you're going to actually attract the right people. So
Mm,
where I would start is values driven leadership.
mhm,
And what that is it's you're really backing into where the business is going. So if you
mm,
think about a business's mission and their vision, saying, I want to grow in this market, or I want to create a new product line, etc., then you say, okay, what are the values, meaning what are the consistencies of how you
mm,
want your people to behave in the business in
yeah.
order to get there? Is
Mm,
it innovation? Is it collaboration? What Is it attention to detail and getting customer feedback? Like, what are those values? And
Mhm.
sometimes these values need to be refreshed depending on how, the business grows, right? So once leadership really comes to an idea of what these values are, then we're able to say, okay, we've got maybe 4 or 5 values. We're going to start infusing them into the processes. And if it's growth, one of those processes could be talent acquisition. So when you think about building programs around like attracting and retaining talent, you want to say, okay, we want people that we want to hire to grow our business to encompass the innovation value of the business, right? So there's 3 different types of things you want to look for in new hires. You want to look at culture, you want to look at hard skills, and you want to look at soft skills or values, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about those pieces of the puzzle, you also start to create the questions that you want to look for in those processes, right? So, what are the questions we want to actually ask new hires or potential candidates? So, by that, you're actually bringing people into the fold that already possess the type of cultural values, the competencies, the soft skills, the hard skills, that kind of layered cake, candidates that you're looking for, and start proposing a value proposition of where they'll be able to thrive with those competencies. So there's definitely a lot of thought that goes into the strategy of how you're going to connect the growth of the business to the people, to either new hires or retain people. And retaining people, it's the same way, right? It's about rewarding the values and behaviors that leaders want to see from you as an employee or as a contributor, to the business. So lots of different things to think about there, David.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I love that you're starting with the leadership team, because I think that from my perspective, if the leadership team doesn't have their values mapped out and the behaviors that really map to those values, it's going to be awfully hard to lead an organization according to those values. And I think that those companies who practice their behaviors, that map to their values, those are the ones that will have their people really all. It's kind of a trite phrase, but rowing in the same direction. They're all rowing in the same rhythm and cadence, because if you've got one side that's rowing slow and another side that's rowing fast, it's going to be going in a circle. And so by starting this way, I think it's really you're going to have a lot of efficiencies within the organization, and you'll attract the right people who are attracted to that kind of a culture.
Exactly. And the employee experience has a lot to do with attracting and retaining talent.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's easier said than done, David,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, you think about the process and it goes, okay, that makes sense. But this is really, really difficult.
it
It's
is.
difficult work to
Yeah.
sustain those values, right? Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
say teamwork is a value
Mm-hmm.
and you're a CEO of, 1,000-person business or a 500-person business, and you just came back from like a trip and you find out that one of your, major clients or customers is unhappy with a new product and you have to bring everything back in. It's like those types of massive issues that hit businesses really hard. Like I feel very empathetic towards leaders who have to go through some of those major pieces of like, I would call them small bits of failure, which I think are
Sure.
actually very good, right?
Right.
Failure, I
Right.
think, is good. But to rebound, to be resilient, and to hold yourself back from, quite frankly, going off on so and so or pointing the finger. It's hard to do that when you are so passionately attached to your business.
Right.
So It's
Right.
easier said than done, but the values really ground, what you're trying to do and what you're trying
Mm.
to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for a leader to say, oh, you want me to be a team player when nobody's in founder mode with me. I'm isolated. Founders and CEOs, executives, they're very isolated. They can feel
Mm.
very lonely.
Right.
And nobody is putting in the amount of work that they're putting into their business, and they can feel it
Mm.
and see it on a daily basis. And so it's just easier said than done. It's hard work. You have to be consistent. You have to be able to sustain the values, right?
Hmm.
And that is the key to growth. That's the
Yeah.
key to growth. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just as you are sharing that scenario, in my mind, I go to the actual behavior, and you think about teamwork, but I also think about practicing blameless problem solving. And so if I'm that CEO, I'm gonna want to take the practicing blameless problem solving approach, and I'm gonna want to go to my team, and I'm gonna want to say, hey, look, let's first of all let's fix the issue, and then secondly, I want to be able to find out where was the breakdown. Was it our processes? Did somebody not follow our process, so we need to retrain them, or is our process flawed? And so let's fix it so that it doesn't happen again. And I think that when you take that approach to actually practicing the behaviors of the values, you get into where I think it's like where the rubber meets the road. And it's those real situations where, yeah, it is hard, but if I'm going to practice what I preach, then I better roll up my sleeves as the CEO and teach this stuff and practice it over and over and over again. And you're so right.
Yes.
I mean, so sustaining the values that lead to the behaviors or that inform the behaviors have to be practiced over and over and over again. Because if it's, I mean, we're a human entity in all of our companies, and so if we're gonna have our culture be something of excellence and high performance, we've definitely got to practice what we preach, and that is hard. That is definitely hard.
I love that you talked about that, David, because it is really difficult for many leaders to practice a blameless
Yeah,
culture. It
yeah,
just really is hard. And you can say it out loud and say, of course I don't want to blame anyone. Of course I'm not that person. But at the end of the day, some people we're human. We can't help
yeah.
ourselves. And I think that business has a lot to do with, like, there's holes in the ground,
Mhm.
right? And those holes represent, like, reacting in a way that's really going to make your culture toxic.
Mhm.
And the only way you win, the only way you stay above ground is if you don't fall in a hole.
Yeah, right,
it's not
exactly.
about, it's not just about crossing the bridge, staying on top
Yeah,
of it's about preventing falling in the hole.
yeah.
And if you can stay above ground, you
Mhm.
can sustain your business. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be failures. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be pushbacks and resistance and blowups from clients and customers. That is all what you signed up for as a
Yeah.
leader. But the way you react to the people inside your business is going to be the way the people inside your business are going to react to your clients and your customers. That's how you win. That's how you grow. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I think that it takes a level of emotional intelligence of a CEO, of a leader, or a founder, especially those that are in a startup mode, because I know startups, they're, things are fast, things are furious. It's like you're a heat-seeking missile, and it can be really, really difficult to be intentional in those scenarios, and keeping your head about you, and actually being very intentional in that kind of a chaotic environment. I think that's where that's the difference between the unicorns and just the growing companies. It's the company that really scales where there's a leader who can keep their head, keep their emotions, in line, and stay above, the ground, and not fall into those holes, as you said. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times when you're starting businesses or when you're just trying to get off the ground, that kind of aggression or power or passion that you have, it works sometimes. It
Sure. Yeah.
does, but it
Yeah.
works temporarily. And it's
Yeah.
not worth investing in a business that you're only going to do something in a temporary way.
Right.
Why put so much time and effort into a business that's going to end up at zero at some point?
That's right.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
but that's a big part of retention, huge
Mm-hmm.
part. People don't leave businesses, they leave leadership, they leave
Yeah.
managers.
Yeah.
Part of having a wonderfully engaged workforce is when they feel supported, they have growth opportunities, they're learning, and they have someone, that's actually like a best friend. And those
Mm.
relationships won't be able to cultivate if you, as a leader at the top, aren't able to actually create those relationships yourself.
Mm-hmm.
People see you all the time. You are in the spotlight as a leader. Uh, and they're going to know when your leadership is not authentic. That's just
Yeah.
the way it is. And I can't say it, enough, because I see it over and over again that, these leaders, they fall in these holes, and I'm that rope that kind of brings them back. I'm
Pulls them
like,
out.
I got you. We're going to stay above the ground together.
Yes.
I'm going to hook
Yes.
you onto a tree or something. Don't fall in the hole.
Don't fall in the hole. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's
Right?
funny. Well, let me
Yeah.
let me shift gears on you for just a moment then. And let's talk about, when it comes to, I think, not only just retaining good people, and attracting good people, but actually developing them. So I work a lot with emerging leaders, and I think you and I have talked about that a little bit in a prior conversation. So let me ask you, from a people perspective and a people strategy perspective, what are some of the best strategies to develop, or maybe even the best practices to develop those emerging leaders? Because I mean, I know that if we're going to grow a company, we're going to need to have a groundswell of people within the organization that are growing too, and that can take over as the company grows. Because as the company grows, we're going to have to plan for succession. Because if I'm in a leadership position, I get promoted as the company grows. I got to backfill my position. So what are some of the best practices around developing those emerging leaders?
Okay. So this is such a wonderfully complicated question. So I want to maybe start with like philosophy
Yeah.
around development. Okay.
Okay.
So
Sure.
there's a famous rule. It's called the 80-20-10 rule. It's kind of an approach to blended learning, but it says that 80% of your learning should be on the job, 20% being like mentorship,
Mm,
and feedback. And then 10% would really be kind of like in a classroom setting.
gotcha.
And if
Yeah.
you think about how do you apply this type of philosophy or strategy to emerging leaders, and thinking about what do emerging leaders really need, right? Because there's
Mhm.
different leaders at different levels. They all need something different to be successful at their level. Emerging leaders are those who are like new leaders or going
Mhm.
to be a new leader that is really wanting to step into the role of developing others,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they a lot of times they're coming from an IC role, which is an individual contributor role,
Mm,
and they are really really amazing at their job, but they've never done this development of others piece. And so I think that there's many different strategies to go about it, and some of these are, for example, creating like group discussions or peer learning. And why do I
mhm.
love this? Because
Yeah.
this is on the job work. This is
Yeah.
stuff that other leaders that are in your organization, in your environment, in your culture, under the appropriate leadership, like the conditions are so consistent that there's going to be little or medium, variability in what you really should be doing as a leader, being able to talk to leaders that actually do this in your environment. So this group discussion and peer learning, I think, is really lovely. It's collaborative. It's, being able to talk about your own failures, helping other people, go through, not go through those mistakes. And then also hearing from new leaders and what those ideas are, right? Because this is like multi-leader discussions. So those emerging leaders having access to other leaders who have been in the role for a long time is so, so powerful and important. And I love that. I think mentoring circles are also really interesting. And these could just be opportunities for open dialogue, something similar to group discussions and peer learning, but also just really hearing from the top and hearing from people maybe on different functions and what leadership looks like in a different way. And the perspective just widens so much, thinking that when emerging leaders or new managers are thinking to themselves, I never thought that would be part of my job. Like, what do I do in that situation? Right. It's like being able to expose something that comes up that you may never not know what might come up. And then I think like action learning projects, right? Like actually putting yourself in a position where you're creating a new project or experimental project on the job that allows you not only to contribute, but also learn at the same time, where you're influencing others, maybe not necessarily directly, but that's actually a more difficult skill to influence others than it is to actually be able to just tell your direct reports, hey, here's what you need to do, right? Because influencing takes persuasion and people don't actually need to do what you're asking them to do. And so actually putting someone in an influential role and trying to convince others is more likely going to allow an emerging leader to be more successful, because a lot of times when you're just a new manager, you're like, oh, now I can tell people what to do. But that's not the skill that's needed in order, right, exactly, to get people to not just do what you're asking them to do, but do it well, take your advice, in a heavy way, really think about the feedback. The other piece is just giving and receiving feedback, right? That in itself is so critical. The one-on-one. If you don't know what a one-on-one is, a one-on-one is just, and this is obviously for your listeners, but a one-on-one is just a really structured way of bringing unstructured conversation and really helping someone, be more mindful of or improve or have a stretch assignment and giving them, opportunity for growth. And it's about, understanding, what they're doing well, where they're at in their progress, and where you can provide help and helping them ask for help, right? In that one-on-one, knowing that you're going to provide guidance and support in gray areas, and then you're going to let them be the decision makers and have ownership of what they're doing. That's like a whole nother episode to talk about the one-on-one. So I won't go into too much detail, but I think the last piece around developing emerging leaders is also the processes, that has to do with scaling culture, right? How do I give a performance review? How do I manage someone out? How do I hire at this company? Those hiring processes are so specific to culture and how fast the business is growing and how you're looking for talent, that in itself needs to be learned. It's specific to the business. And so those types of processes are really also very important before a leader steps into a new role.
Yeah. I would love to have you talk for just a moment. We'll take a quick side trail because I love this idea of the one-on-one and like, because there are a lot of leaders, especially new people leaders, who they've never done this before. They think that just because they see their folks, the people that report to them, every day, that That's good enough. And so
Mm.
what's like the outline, or what's kind of a structure that you suggest for that one-on-one meeting with, with their team? Because I think any emerging leader, or, we have a group of advancing leaders that probably don't know like how to structure a really good one-on-one meeting. And I'd love to hear kind of your approach, or at least some of your thoughts.
Okay, yes. So this is such a good question. So firstly, I think that every business does this a little bit differently.
Right.
And there's different types of structures that work for different types of businesses.
Sure.
But I think let's just start with frequency.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you an example. I was working with a leader and I said, well, when are you going to do your one-on-ones? And he said to me, oh, I see my people every day. They come in and out of my office. And I thought, okay. I'm like, well, that's good that you have that very collaborative, open communication, open door policy.
Right.
But one-on-ones are a bit different. And in this way, it gives the individual private time to
Mm,
express themselves and what they're doing well, where they might be stuck, and how
mm,
they ask for help.
mm,
And that's different. That's a closed door, or it's a walk in the park, or it's a grab a coffee conversation where it allows you to really, allow that person to leave that conversation with, here's what I have to do.
mhm,
Um, at the uh, beginning levels, smaller teams, I think, warrant weekly one-on-one. So this
sure.
is, a one-on-one with each direct report every week. It could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, just
Mhm,
depending on the timing, how much help that person might need, and so forth. And then maybe at the top, it could be, either once a week, every other week, a
mm,
one-on-one, right? So it just depends. And then the structure of the conversation should really start with the direct report, the team
mm,
member, the individual team member. And the reason why I say this is because they should be leading this one on one, not the leader. The leader is there to listen and guide. And the individual who's the direct report should come in and say, here's my list. Here's what I've gotten done this week since our last one on one. Here's an update, here's an update. And then there's a portion of, here's what I'm working on, and here's where I'm stuck. And that's where you come in as a leader, right? You're saying, okay, let's talk about why you're stuck. Well, there's this relationship that I have with my peer. It's not so great. And I really need her to participate in this project. And we're not really seeing eye to eye. And so the project is stalled.
mm.
So that's not something that just have a conversation when someone comes in and out of your office. It's
Right.
something like, okay, well, let's figure out, let's get down to brass tacks, and why is this relationship struggling, and so forth. And
Mhm,
so you're really there to help unblock an individual from progressing in their role. And that is really the definition of a one-on-one, right? The other piece of the puzzle is support, and being able to give that person kind of recognition and support in what they're doing really well. Why
mhm,
is that important? Because if people don't feel recognized for what their accomplishments are, or just what their like just their general contributions are, they're not going to feel valued, and they're not going to want to stick around a business or a company or a culture that doesn't value them. I mean, that's just the bottom
sure.
line. So that piece of recognition is really important as well. And the way that you give recognition is also important. So
Mm,
this could be, a lot of times it's like, you're doing a great job. Like, that's okay. That's great. That's recognition. It is, but the
one way, yeah.
recognition I'm talking about is saying, David, I really loved the way that you helped me understand the needs and desires of your listeners on this podcast. And so I was really, because of that, I was really able to really think through some of the content that you needed and what they needed. And so, this has been a fantastic episode because of your support. So thank you so much. And that's true, by the way. That's a true fact. But being specific about, what this person has actually behaviorally done or accomplished, that is valuable recognition. If you're going to give somebody recognition, make it count.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always think about when I show meaningful appreciation. I think the key word there is meaningful, and it's specific. It kind of even like I like to tie it back to the cultural behavior. So if I'm being prepared, then being able to say, hey, I loved the way that you prepared for this project, and it helped or it had this impact on the business. So when you tie in the cultural aspect of that appreciation, it's meaningful because it's specific and it also ties into the culture. And so you're kind of getting two birds with one stone there.
Absolutely. Yes, you're spot on. Exactly. That is part of the culture. That's about building the culture.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, I love, thank you so much for that little side trail on the one-on-one, because I think it's really helpful. I think, just by virtue of having some kind of an agenda, a standard agenda, and definitely making the participant be the leader, and telling the leader where they need to go, I think is really important. Let me shift gears then on you for just a moment then, and go back to like the senior leader when we're talking about overall people strategy, and we're building our people, we're building our emerging leaders. And when the senior leaders are looking at their team, what are some of the things that they should look at when it comes to succession planning and preparing people to be in certain roles? What are some strategies around succession planning?
Okay, so succession planning. How fun is this to talk about? I know I feel like such a
I
nerd
love it.
talking about this stuff,
That
but
was so great.
it's really like, my mind goes in so many different directions because there's so much to talk about. But I think number one is just understand the leadership competency framework that you have in
Mm,
your business. And for those listeners who don't know what this is, it's really about understanding what do you expect behaviorally from a competency, that means a soft skill
mm,
standpoint,
mm.
from each of the levels that you have in your organizational design. So that could be C-suite, it could be VP level, director level, manager, and then yeah, like manager, senior manager. Like that's kind of your staple leadership levels. Um, and then being able to parse out what exactly your expectations are at each level. Without
Mm,
that,
mm.
it's really difficult to do succession planning.
Yeah,
So if once you have that leadership framework in place, and that could just mean like, for example, someone who is at a manager level should be able to know how to hire,
right,
being able to hire well. Someone at a VP or C-suite level should be able to, share vision,
right.
articulate vision really well. So those are the types of key differences that you want to be able to articulate between the levels. So this creates the framework, the basic roadmap of what do we really want at that level. When it comes to succession, you want to then build out your leadership pipeline. And so this is like understanding not just by title and on who might be next, but also their capacity to take on the next role, the readiness to take on the next role. Do they have the skills, the competencies, the availability? What if you want to move someone overseas? Or is there, are they and their family ready to take the move? Are they ready? And is this really what the company needs? Like if a company is looking to shift into AI, then they're looking for to build their pipeline of those who have knowledge, skills, and abilities around AI to lead the business in the future. So what is the gap between the levels, right? And you can only really identify that through the frameworks and also the skills needed for the future. And then the next step is to actually not just identify those people, but then put them on in a what I call HIPO program. A HIPO program, HIPO, really stands for high potential. We've identified these high potentials. They're not ready today, but now we need to develop them. So you put them in a HIPO program that really helps them focus on closing the gap with a stretch project or in during the business, right? And this could be 6 months, a year, 3 years down the line. It just depends on what the needs are for the business, what the needs are for the role, and so forth. And so once you've established that kind of development plan, these could be very unique. And these could be, depending how big the organization is, this could also be, a thematic, right? Anybody going into a VP role would get, these types of development plans and so forth. So it's highly customized. But then once you have people in those HIPO programs, then you're looking for regular assessments. You have to kind of assess the talent regularly, keep them on track. It's about partnering with your HR department, your HR business partner, as well as the leader that is, or the manager that's leading the high potential candidate internally, and having that partnership of making sure that the HIPO program is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. And if there are gaps and blockers, to make sure that we get people on the right track if we're not doing our job to help develop them. Finally, the last step is transition planning. And this is important because it's just like onboarding. It's internal onboarding. Someone is stepping into a new role. They've gotten their stretch assignment. They're ready. They have capacity to take on the role. But now there's different influencers. There's different peers. There's maybe a different manager. It's like hiring someone new. It could be different location, getting them accustomed, onboarded, transitioned. That takes a little bit of time still. And so as a leader, you have to give that person, the ability to kind of move in order to be successful. And so that's really important too. And so I think one thing to that's important to keep in mind is making sure that there's also cultural alignment. Anybody you're putting in the leadership pipeline for succession planning needs to 100% abide by the culture, or your culture will break, like hands down. That is a guarantee, right? I mean, you should only be promoting those who live and breathe the culture, because everybody under them is going to see their leadership style, and they're going to emulate what that looks like. And so culture is, a must-have. Skills, hard skills, soft skills, you can close the gap over time, but culture is a need for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I mean, culture is near and dear to my heart. And I think that, if we're gonna create that succession plan, that has to be such an integral part of the whole mix, because like you said, if the individual doesn't buy into the culture, doesn't not just buy into it, but actually embody it, then you're gonna, you're not going to be successful, or that person is not going to be successful. And it's kind of like a plant. If you have one branch of the plant that is just not buying into to the whole thing, it's going to die. And so you definitely don't want that as your for your organization. Well, let me ask maybe one last question. As you think about some of these strategies that we've talked about here for just an organization's people, I'm so passionate about the people element of an organization, especially as it relates to growth. What, if you're the CEO, what do you prioritize? All these things, are great. These sound wonderful, but like, how do I prioritize my people strategy?
Such a good question. So great questions. I think that I think kind of like back to what I said in the beginning, it's really starts with the values. The
Yeah.
values can't be determined without clear mission vision. And sometimes mission and vision are not clear,
Right.
especially if you're in like a growth stage or late stage startup. Well, more so growth stage, but like if you're a seed stage or growth stage startup, small business, you're still trying to figure it out. And so I think that when you think about people strategy, you should be open to being malleable and just being
Yeah.
flexible with which way your business needs to go to really satisfy the need of your clients or customers.
Hmm.
And your customers are the North Star. That's clear, right? And
Hmm.
so if they need something different, you need to adjust your mission vision. You need to adjust your values. You need to refresh, I like to kind of say. You need
Sure.
to have a refresh.
Yeah.
And sticking with values for 10 years, it's like you want to question an organization a little bit and be like, well, you've done the same thing for 10 years. I'm like, the world
Mm.
has grown, the world's
Yeah.
changed 10 years
Sure.
ago. So what are you doing?
Yeah.
That's kind of the theme. It's like you should be evolving. And
Right.
your people will be evolving. And it's
Mm.
like a little bit of a moving target, but that is the fun part of business, right? And so I think just where you start is having clarity on what you need and what you want. That sometimes is its own journey. And then on top of that, having great leaders at the top, it is really difficult to get anything done, especially from a people strategy perspective, when you don't have leaders that are aligned in kind of the
Mm.
general direction of what you're going. Now, don't get me wrong, diversity is fantastic.
Yep.
Diversity is fantastic. And you really want to have different opinions and ideas at the top, but the way that people collaborate at the top, the way that people are open to perspective at the top is really important to actually
Hmm.
make change and make things work and make things happen. So once you have, that kind of alignment at the top, those values, everything is like, it's so much easier. There's less time being spent struggling with change management. There's less
Hmm.
time, fighting over what questions to ask candidates.
Yeah.
There's just the it's all kind of downhill from there. Things become
Right.
much easier to create process and to really make sure that we're doing the right thing for our
Right.
people and for the people who are going to join us and for the people who are leaving that may not
Right.
be a good fit. And so that's really important to look at it from that perspective. And so I would say that that's kind of where you start.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that a lot of senior leaders, especially, they don't necessarily always realize that there's seasons of a business life. And I think what you're alluding to there is there's just different, just like we were talking before we hit record about just the different seasons, the geographic seasons or the the natural environmental seasons. There are seasons of a business, and I think that people strategy, but where you focus just really depends on what season you're in, whether you're in that growth season, whether you're in that evolution season. Maybe you're going from that startup phase to, hey, now we're gonna have processes, and we're gonna have kind of be grown up now, and we
Right.
have
We're
to
going to grow
have,
up now.
yeah, and so we have to have our people follow those processes, and we have to have people that are willing to do that. And so I think that just recognizing that, it probably is going to be more helpful to understand what season of business am I in, so that I can then target the people strategies that we're needing, and what do we need at different stages. So Felicia, this has been a really wide-ranging conversation, I know, but I wanted to make sure that I tapped into the wealth of your knowledge, because I really have appreciated just our prior conversations, and I knew that this was going to be a really good conversation. I know that you've got a podcast, so talk a little bit about that so that people can come and hear you more on your podcast, and then where else can people get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I have a podcast and it's called CPO Playbook. So Chief People Officer Playbook. And I interview other chief people officers. I interview experts and non-HR executives who are inviting people's strategy into their success and their business world. And we talk about how those people's strategies really help their businesses grow. So it's really fun. I'm having a great time with it.
It's
and yeah. And
it's
we
highly
solve.
rated too, by the way. So
Oh, yes,
I
it
know
is. Thank
you
you.
won't say that, but I will. It's highly rated, so it's great. And I've listened to it, and it's wonderful. Yeah, you've had some really great guests on there, and really wanted to make sure that people get a chance to hear you in your own element, rather than being on that side, this side of the microphone.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate it. It's so funny because we solve a business challenge on every single episode, and the wide range of different type of interviewees I've had. Like I've had the executive producer at like Killers of the Flower Moon, Niels Jewell,
Oh,
who,
wow.
was just looks at life so differently. And then I've had, like the CEO of Nitio, which is like a 30,000, tech company, world, like global tech company. And just a variety
That's
of back
amazing.
and forth and understanding how leadership just changes through different functions and
Mm,
industries is just so fascinating. I'm like, when I started the show, I thought, gosh, I would just love the conversation, just me and this person, right?
right, right.
So
Love that.
we really get into it, and this show, David, it has been such a pleasure to listen to. I'm going to keep listening, and thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your contribution to the podcasting world and sharing
Uh,
your knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia. Well, it's been an honor to have you here. Thank you for sharing just the very tip of your knowledge and expertise. Really appreciate it. Can't wait to have a follow up at some point in the future.
Amazing. I can't wait.